Hello and welcome back to the Usage Report. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And let's dive right back into things here. We got a few familiar playing time situations that we've looked at previously that continue to be a bit of a headache for fantasy owners. And let's jump into the first, and that's the Arizona Cardinals. The backfield featured three backs playing at least 9 snaps. Chris Johnson led the way with 39 offensive snaps. Surprisingly, David Johnson was second to him with 23 offensive snaps, and Andre Ellington brought up the rear, not even reaching double digits in offensive snaps, playing 9, touching the ball just 3 times, 1 carry, 2 receptions. He was more effective than David Johnson, but the playing time disparity, the fact that Ellington didn't even reach 10 offensive snaps doesn't bode well for his immediate future. It means that he needs to be glued to benches along with David Johnson until either or both possibly emerge as fantasy relevant players. Ellington has a little bit more upside since, namely in PPR leagues, since it looks like of the two, he's most likely to emerge as a complement to Johnson since his pass catching skills have been utilized there in the past. But Johnson did get goal line work in week 5, so who knows? The only back that is safely worth using is Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson didn't turn in his best effort of the season, but he still led the backfield in carries by a wide margin, yardage by a wide margin, and he even caught a pass. So Chris Johnson is a startable option every week at this point, which I can't believe that I'm saying in the year 2015 after the mess season that he had last year with the Jets and and the clunker really that he had in his last season in Tennessee. But Chris Johnson seems to fit this explosive Arizona Cardinals offense very well, and depending on the matchup, he's as good as an RB2 or at worst really a flex, just because the volume's there and being attached to the second highest scoring offense in football is quite the good thing. I wouldn't advocate dropping Andre Ellington or David Johnson if you do roster them currently. I think both have a chance to emerge as viable fantasy options should Chris Johnson suffer an injury. And in the case of Ellington, I think he has a chance to emerge as a possible PPR flex option down the stretch if he gets integrated more into the offense. But both have some upside. Both are handcuff quality backs. Both, I would say, are high-end handcuff quality backs, even though it looks like there's not going to be a feature back at any point this year. Even if there is an injury to Chris Johnson, they're going to continue to go for John with a running back by committee with backs taking on their specialized roles. But being tied to the second highest scoring offense in football on a points per game basis is a pretty darn good thing. So as long as Carson Palmer is healthy, that's an offense you want some investment in. Next up is an offense that is not nearly as prolific and has an even less desirable backfield, and that's the Cleveland Browns. Duke Johnson, once again, your leader in offensive snaps, once again, your leader in productivity in the backfield, led the backfield in rushing yards with 38, led the backfield in targets and receptions with 4 and 3 respectively. Isaiah Crowell's status as being rosterable pretty much expired this week. Robert Turbin played 18 snaps as well. The carry situation was a mess. Duke Johnson carried the ball 9 times. Isaiah Crowell carried 11 times, leading the backfield. But Robert Turbin also saw 10 carries. Neither Crowell or Turbin were terribly effective. Turbin averaged 2.7 yards per carry, totaling 27, and Crowell was just under 3 yards per carry with 32 on 11 carries. So neither one really shined. Duke Johnson was the most effective back as a runner, not just as a pass catcher. Carried the ball 9 times for 38 yards, but it looks like Mike Patton and that offense are unwilling to lean on Johnson more heavily than we've seen at this point. It looks like they want to have something of a hammer complement to him. The problem is now for Crowell owners who need to no longer be Crowell owners after this week is that Robert Turbin can also fit the bill as that hammer back to go with Duke Johnson. And it looks like the team's going to at least give Turbin a look. And Crowell just hasn't been a very good runner as it stands. And now that he's got competition, it's not worth rostering either Crowell or Turbin in 12-team leagues. Maybe if you're in a 14-team league or larger, you can hold on to Crowell, hoping that his talent gets him more carries than Turbin. Maybe he gets some goal line work, but the upside is minimal. Duke Johnson's really the only back worth rostering, and he's a little more than a bench option in standard scoring leagues. Has some flex appeal depending on the matchup in PPRs, though. Next up is the Denver Broncos running back situation, which I seem to be discussing every week on the podcast. But finally, the Broncos leaned on Ronnie Hillman more heavily in the running game, and the results pretty much speak for themselves. 44 snaps for Hillman to 40 snaps for C.J. Anderson. The Hillman had a nice 7-carry advantage with 20 carries to Anderson's 13, and a more impressive 70-yard run discrepancy, totaling 111 yards on the ground compared to C.J. Anderson's paltry 41. Hillman targeted 5 times, caught 3 passes. C.J. Anderson still used in the passing game, caught 4 passes on 4 targets, but Anderson's just been a mess this year. He hasn't even topped 15 carries in a game, nor should he with the way he's running the ball. Ronnie Hillman topped 100 yards rushing for the second time in the last 3 weeks. He's clearly the better back in the system right now. Broncos enter the bye week undefeated, but that offense has been a mess. Hillman playing well in 2 of the last 3 games before the bye certainly give them reason to lean on him coming out of the bye, but 2 really tough matchups coming up, facing the Packers after the bye and the Panthers after that. So 2 situations where things don't necessarily look too promising for this backfield. But Hillman is definitely a must-own at this point. He's got running back 2 upside. He's got flex starting ability every week at this point, especially with the tide turning towards him getting more carries. Anderson, I'm willing to cut him more slack than maybe I should be. He had a big finish last year, so I'm going to say roster him just a little bit longer, see if maybe the bye is what cures what ails him. But we're not talking about a guy who, to anyone's knowledge, has an injury that he's battling, where the bye week maybe could be that fix-all for him, but he was just so good down the stretch. I'm unwilling to say to cut him at this point, at least in 12-team leagues. If you're in a 10-teamer, I have no problem with cutting ties with him at this point. The talent pool is deep enough in a league like that you can go ahead and cut ties. But in 12-team leagues or larger, I think you need to give Anderson just a little bit longer. But he's certainly behind Hillman in the pecking order. If I could have either back for the rest of the season, Hillman would be by far my choice. Next up is the Green Bay Packers. And Eddie Lacy had a golden opportunity, and to say he laid an egg would probably be the most appropriate all ages response to that. Carried the ball just 4 times, total less than a yard per carry with 3 rushing yards. His long play of the game was a 12-yard reception, caught just 2 passes, and James Starks shined and looked great. Granted, Starks only carried the ball 10 times, and he did have 1 long touchdown run that padded stats, but 10 carries for 112 yards. I mean, that basically stole Eddie Lacy's thunder. He looked like the quicker, sleeker, more elusive back, looked like just an all-around better player. And Lacy, if you want to blame his early season struggles on being less than 100%, I think that's a little bit optimistic. We do know that he has been banged up this year, but he just hasn't looked good, and I'm not willing to believe that the bye week is going to fix all of that. And he comes out of the bye week. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. It's the Packers actually come out of the bye week facing the Broncos and the Panthers. The Broncos do not face the Panthers 2 weeks from now. So let me clean that up right now. But the Packers come out of this bye week with 2 really tough run defense assignments. And Lacy, I mean, as bad as he looked, it's tough to advocate even starting him as a flex in either of those matchups. Unless you've got a very talented bench, though, I think you almost have to roll the dice on him as a flex and hope that the bye week does help him turn his season around a little bit. He is tied to an Aaron Rodgers-led offense that can really hang some points. So at least he has some goal line potential as a saving grace. But those 2 weeks are going to be tough. If you do have some deep bench options, don't be afraid to sit Lacy coming out of the bye week against 2 stout run defenses. James Starks is a must-own in 12-team leagues or larger because the upside is immense. If Eddie Lacy were to miss some time, or as I suggested in the article, end up in the doghouse, then Starks emerges as a RB2 in leagues of all sizes. You can catch the ball, you can run the ball. He has had trouble staying healthy at times in the past, but again, you want pieces that are tied to this Aaron Rodgers-led offense. And granted, the ceiling is probably capped for either back at this point. Rodgers can use the short passing game as an extension of the run, so there's no guarantee that a feature back, even if Lacy reclaims that feature back status, or Lacy were to go down and Starks were to be the feature back, no guarantee that back's going to get more than 15 to 20 touches per game. But being tied to that Green Bay offense and the lack of true feature backs certainly would at least keep Starks or Lacy in RB2 status. So next up is our last running back situation we're going to take a look at, and that's of the Kansas City Chiefs. This was week 1 without Jamaal Charles, and it was not a productive game on the ground for the Chiefs. They faced the Minnesota Vikings, totaled 18 rushes for just 57 yards in that contest. And, I mean, that basically speaks volumes about what a special talent Jamaal Charles is. He certainly did a lot more behind that offensive line than either of his replacements. Charcandrick West played more than twice as many offensive snaps as Knile Davis, but didn't double him up in carries. The carry totals were 9 for West, 5 for Knile Davis, 33 rushing yards for West, and 13 for Davis. Neither one lit the world on fire. Collectively, they ran for less than 50 yards. So not the type of start that anybody that scrambled to the waiver wire, possibly Jamaal Charles owners looking for a replacement for their injured RB1 was hoping for. I am still going to say cut them some slack, give them a little bit longer. See if I think both backs are worth rostering for a few more weeks to see if one emerges, one is able to maybe take the reins, become the feature back there. There are some weapons in this offense: Travis Kelce, Jeremy Maclin, enough that I think that if the line play can improve just a little bit and keep Alex Smith upright, this offense isn't necessarily going to be terrible. And if either back were to get around 20 touches per game, they would probably have at least flex appeal. But there is a possibility that this turns into a full-on RBBC, and that would make neither back startable in leagues of any size, really. So give them a few more weeks. Let's see how this thing shakes itself out, but just be aware that the ceiling isn't necessarily terribly high, and the floor is 2 non-startable backs. Moving on to the aerial side of things, we'll go back to the desert and look at the Arizona Cardinals. No shocker that Larry Fitzgerald and John Brown continue to be the top 2 pass-catching options in that offense. They're both startable every week. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald's been a stud this year. He's not only startable, but we're talking about upwards of a top 5 receiver possibly by season's end. Brown is delivering on his promise as a sleeper headed into the season. Had a monster effort this week with 10 receptions on 14 targets for 196 yards receiving. But neither of those receivers found the end zone. It was Michael Floyd who found the end zone, was targeted 8 times, had 5 receptions for 50 yards, played 54 snaps, so he's on the field plenty. They do not have a pass-catching tight end in this offense. Yes, they do utilize their backs a little bit in the passing game. David Johnson, Andre Ellington, and Chris Johnson all have some pass-catching skills, so that does offset some of the fact that they don't have a tight end that they really utilize in the passing game, but they have shown a willingness to air the ball out a ton in Bruce Arians' offense. And Carson Palmer has been a great ringleader this year. He's picked up where he left off last year before injury. He has played just brilliant football with Bruce Arians at the helm as the head coach. And Floyd started the year with some broken fingers. Was quiet for the first 2 weeks, really hasn't had a big performance yet, but this is his best fantasy performance yet. Most targets he's seen in a game this year. Second time of reaching 50 yards or more in the last 3 contests. First time reaching the end zone on the season this week. I do think that there is enough ball to go around for him to be a flex option in 12-team leagues or larger as we wind through the bye weeks, meaning he's more of a bench option that is playable during the right matchup, or if you just have a number of players on bye. But Floyd has had some big games throughout his career. He does have talent. He is a former first-round pick, and he has played well at times. he's third in the pecking order, but again, this is the second highest scoring offense in football on a per game scoring basis. So grabbing pieces is advisable, to say the least. Next up is an offense that was expected to be explosive this year, but was without Andrew Luck for a few contests and returned him in a game that most people expected to be a boat race, really, and it turned out to be much closer than most expected. Rematch of the AFC Championship game between the Colts and the Patriots, or the revenge game as the narrative went, but didn't turn into the boat race as some expected, but we did get to see Andrew Luck air the ball out 50 times. And since this is just his fourth game played this year, it was quite helpful for possibly identifying how these targets are going to be divvied out the rest of the year. We did have 3 games to work with in terms of looking to see who he was targeting, but his return as the starter after Matt Hasselbeck filled in admirably for a couple of weeks, won them a couple of games. It was good to see that Luck came back. I should say it was good to see, if you are a Donte Moncrief owner, that Andrew Luck came back and picked right up where he left off, targeting Donte Moncrief more than any other receiver on the offense. Moncrief was targeted 11 times, caught a touchdown pass for the 3rd time playing with Luck this season. So he's caught touchdown passes, and 3 of his 4 touchdown passes have been caught playing with Andrew Luck. So he's been very good this year when Luck's been under center. Was at least passable with Matt Hasselbeck in one of his 2 starts, and 6 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown is a solid effort for Moncrief. 11 targets. You're not going to see Andrew Luck air it out 50 times a game, every game, but I don't see any reason to expect Donte Moncrief to end up with less than a half dozen targets in many contests the rest of the year. So set your expectations at about 8 to 10 targets. He and Hilton are going to divvy up most of the targets. And if you're an Andre Johnson owner at this point, man, he's got to be really at the fringe of your roster. He did not follow up what I'll call a homecoming game. He went back to Houston, scored 2 touchdowns against his former employer, the Texans. I mean, the only team that he played for before this year. They definitely seem to make a concerted effort to get him the football and allow him to kind of stick it to his old team. But just 3 receptions for 35 receiving yards, and really looks like a cliff season for him. So right now, the 2 most ownable options in fantasy leagues, and really the only 2 that I can say need to be owned in all formats, are T.Y. Hilton, who's still the #1 receiver there, led the team in receiving yards, caught a touchdown pass this week, tied Donte Moncrief for the reception lead 6. I mean, he's the wide receiver 1. When Andrew Luck is playing, they have great chemistry, great rapport. But Donte Moncrief is creeping up as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and a must-start every week. And then Andre Johnson, don't be afraid to cut him if there's something out on the wire that is even modest interest. And then Philip Dorsett, I will throw his name out there again. He did play 30 snaps, caught 2 passes on 4 targets for 30 yards. Not a big showing, but he does continue to get some exposure in the passing game. And as a rookie, it's possible that as he catches up to speed at the NFL level, that maybe he makes a bit of an imprint here down the stretch. But he's more of a home run threat and a boomer bust play option at this point as a shorter receiver that's quite fast and can blow the top off of defenses. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings. And I will apologize to Stefon Diggs, though he is unlikely to ever hear this apology. Sold him short after his first game of his NFL career in Week 5, Week 4, headed into the Vikings bye week. All he did was go out and best his first game. Was targeted 9 times, caught 7 passes, totaled 129 yards. And one remarkable stat that I was blown away by was that 6 of his 13 receptions in his 2 games played have gone for 20-plus yards. So Stefon Diggs has been a big play waiting to happen since getting thrust into this Minnesota offense. Basically, he's playing like those who drafted Charles Johnson as a breakout candidate had hoped Johnson would play. And Stefon Diggs has really emerged as the wide receiver to own in this Minnesota passing attack. Mike Wallace still ownable. He was targeted 9 times, only hauled in 2 receptions, but those 9 targets are promising for some decent performances down the stretch. He is a boomer bust candidate, not the most efficient receiver. Does sometimes become a little bit reliant on big plays, but the fact that Teddy Bridgewater did air it out 9 times in his direction is promising from a volume perspective. And those two are ownable. And then Kyle Rudolph did what Kyle Rudolph does. This might be the most Kyle Rudolph line of the year. 2 receptions, 9 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. It's touchdown or bust with Kyle Rudolph. We know the story by now. Final situation we're going to look at is the New England Patriots, and it's their passing attack. And now, I'm not going to say that Danny Amendola is a must grab. That would be crazy talk. Anybody that's suggesting that off of a 100+ yard receiving performance is really buying into some recency bias here. But it is worth noting that Dion Lewis was not 100% entering this contest, and really that's why I wanted to throw this contest, this playing time situation, this usage situation under the spotlight. Lewis, not 100%, was targeted just 6 times in the passing game, caught 3 passes, wasn't used much as a rusher. So one has to think that that was by design, that they didn't want to overuse him because he wasn't 100% healthy. If Lewis is to miss any time, or Lewis continues to be dinged up, Danny Amendola looks like the beneficiary that maybe flies a little bit under the radar. Most would expect, yeah, LeGarrette Blount will benefit because he'll get to play more in the backfield. Maybe he'll get a few more carries. But Lewis, his primary function in that offense is as a short pass catcher, as a safety blanket of sorts for Tom Brady. It's the guy that they go to and let pile up some yak. And Danny Amendola really filled that role this week. Was targeted 9 times, caught 7 passes, totaled 105 receiving yards. So in any contest, Dion Lewis is inactive. Danny Amendola becomes a viable plug-and-play at the flex. And if you're a DFS gamer, Amendola becomes an interesting GPP option. But really, his value is largely tied to the health of Dion Lewis, because if Lewis is healthy and the Patriots are operating at full strength, Edelman and Gronk are going to tie up the bulk of the targets, and Dion Lewis is going to be that safety blanket underneath for Tom Brady. So on that note, that's going to wrap things up. Thank you for joining me. Check out all the great content at Fantasy Football Cafe. We're going to keep posting it throughout the year. Get on the Fantasy Football forums. Take advantage. You've only got 17 regular season weeks to enjoy fantasy football. Most leagues just 16 weeks, because most of us have eliminated that 17th week from the schedule just based on the fact that sometimes you get those starters sitting. So not a lot of weeks to really thoroughly enjoy that fantasy football community in full swing. So get on there, chat it up, have some fun. And until next week, good luck in your fantasy leagues.